Well, good afternoon, everybody, and a hugely warm welcome to tomorrow, a week-long invitation to ask some of the deeper questions about who we are and where we're going, who we want to be, both as people and as society. And in particular, we're going to be looking at the teachings of Jesus and what they could possibly have in relevance to these questions for us now in the 21st century. Over this lunchtime, we're looking at the question of, do we need truth anymore? And to help us start that discussion is going to be Pete Nicholas, who's going to come and talk to us. Pete studied PPE at a little-known town called Oxford. Don't know if anybody's heard of it. And that's where he became a Christian. And following that, he's written a couple of books which have been published and is now leading a church in London. So we're really grateful for you, Pete, for coming up to talk all the lunchtimes this week. Pete's going to talk for about 20-25 minutes, after which there will be time for Q&A. During the talk, you might see there's numbers posted around the building. Do text in any questions to those that you have during the talk, and there'll be a bit of time afterwards, and then we'll get on with the Q&A. But that's all from me for now, so would you welcome Pete together as we start this week?
Thanks, Max, very much. And you'll see there'll be a number around that I think you can see on the pillars. That number's there so that for the Q&A afterwards, we've got about 10 minutes after I finish speaking where we'll just be taking live questions. And I'm conscious that's probably not quite enough time to do justice to all the questions, so apologies in advance, but it's the best format to give you the opportunity to get back to your lectures. So if I haven't answered your question, or if you think I answer your question in a horrible way, then grab me at the end, and my time's your time. I'm happy to chat more. So this question, how do we need truth anymore? It's a big question, and I think it's the right one to get at the start of the week as we try to lay the foundations for what we're going to be thinking about later on in the week as we grapple with issues that I hope you can come back for, like how do we make the world a better place, and identity, what is our identity formed on, hope, and also success. But we need the foundation of truth. Now, a friend of mine who's a doctor told me a story recently, which I think exposes where we're at on this issue of truth, which is we have a kind of love-hate relationship with truth, often slightly contradictory, in that we want truth, but we're not sure quite whether we fully trust those who claim to have truth. So a girl who was about 16 or 17 came into a doctor's surgery. Of course, the doctor told me the story in an anonymous way to be appropriate. But she said as the young girl came in, she looked very nervous. And she told the doctor that she had a problem, that her tattoo that she had gotten recently on her shoulder had become infected. And she was particularly nervous because she hadn't told her parents about the fact that she had got a tattoo, and she was worried that if her parents found out that she had a tattoo, that they were going to kind of kill her type thing. I'm sure they weren't actually going to kill her. So asking my friend who's a doctor, she said, "You don't have to tell my parents, do you, about this?" And my friend, the doctor, said, no, of course not. I mean, there's doctor-patient confidentiality. And then she looked at the tattoo and she said, "Oh, it's a symbol, looks like some kind of Japanese symbol. What does it mean?" And the young girl turned around and she said, "Oh, it means honesty." Not a hint of irony at all. Now, I think that's where we're at. We love the idea of values like honesty, authenticity, integrity, but we're skeptical about truth. We are the generation, well, that's probably unfair for me to put in your generation, isn't it? I'm just trying to do that to link up. But, you're the generation, and my generation to a lesser extent, who had been told that truth claims are power plays. That's the dictum of a guy called Michel Foucault. And so we've seen through various, kind of historical events, and even in our lifetime, the way that people with particular cultural power often use truth as a way to manipulate and hold on to that power. Now, whether it's going back in history to the totalitarian regimes controlling the truth and the resultant gulags of Stalin's Russia, or whether it's to politicians today who claim truth, and of course we saw it with Brexit, and with these claims plastered over the side of buses, truth claims that were linked to party interests and power, we've become skeptical about it. So on one level, the millennial generation are the generation whose highest value in a leader is authenticity, swiftly followed by integrity, both truth in a holistic sense words. And on the other level, we're saying that we can't have truth and we don't want truth. And so what has this led to? Well, it hasn't led to us jettisoning truth. That would be not a very subtle or accurate analysis. But in the 1960s with the culture wars, what it led to was a growth in the view of relativism, that all truth ultimately is relative. And then in the 70s and 80s on the back of that, it became all truth is personal. It's down to you and your subjective perception of it. Fast forward that a little bit, 2016, the word of the year according to the Oxford English Dictionary was post-truth. Now, again, let's be careful. That doesn't mean like, I'm so over truth, just give me lies. That's not what that word means. Post-truth means, well, let me read the dictionary definition out for you. It means objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and belief. In other words, the locus, the place of truth has shifted from being objective truth that's kind of out there to being truth that's in here. If you feel it, if you really believe it, then it's true. Now let's try and work out kind of how we got there. Let's see some of the cultural moves. And what I'm going to explore with you is something called the facts-value dichotomy. I will explain that a little bit. And then I'm going to look at some of the problems with the facts-value dichotomy as our basis for truth. Then we're going to look at what the nature of truth, and particularly Christian truth, is. And then we'll finally end by looking at the challenge of truth and how we actually respond to truth when we come into contact with it. Let's think, first of all, of the facts-value dichotomy. One of the big moves that's happened in culture is that we've tried to split truth and kind of opinions or values. So there are certain areas of life, we think, where there is truth. Science, maths, certain aspects of history and the news. We're dealing with facts in those things. Then there are other areas of life, religion, philosophy, ethics, interpretation of history, where it's about opinion. And so we've made that move, and that seems to be quite a clever move, right? Because if you do that, then when someone claims to have the truth, well, it's their opinion. You get to be able to see what is kind of party interest, them trying to advance their agenda. So that distinction seems to do the job for us. And then we don't want to jettison truth and engineering or science. When it comes to building a house, you need to know what the truth is about the metrics of like load bearing, otherwise you're in trouble, right? We all get that. So we've done that kind of distinction, and it initially seems to be quite an attractive way. The problem is that as we do that, we get ourselves into some problems. For example, as we jettison those things, then the facts-value dichotomy seems to break down a bit. For example, imagine that I come to you and I say, let me tell you something about your friend or your boyfriend. I heard them in the pub or in the bar, and they were talking in incredibly racist tones. Now, you wouldn't turn around and kind of say, Pete, that's just an opinion, it's their value. No one can really know the truth in the realm of, values and opinions. You'd be like, tell me more, like, is that true? Did they say that? You see, in real life, when something really matters to you, you don't go to the facts-value dichotomy. You kind of say, tell me the truth. I need to know the truth. And we've seen that played out, haven't we? With all of the scandals. We want inquiries that get to the bottom of it and get to the truth. I mean, admittedly, we're skeptical whether they actually do that when you see people lined up in front of the peers and the MPs and they're asking them questions. They seem good at, like, worming their way out of it. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to the truth. So we're trying to get to the bottom of this issue. Can we find really truth? But as we do that as well, the problem is that, you don't hear people saying, I'm entitled to my own facts. You hear people say, I'm entitled to my own opinion, but not I'm entitled to my own facts. So it doesn't really hold this distinction. One of the other problems with it is that this facts-value distinction has paved the way for fake news. So Alison Gow is the editor-in-chief of arguably the largest print kind of organization in the UK, which is now called Reach PLC, used to be called Trinity Mirror, and has publications like the Daily Mail and the Sunday Mirror. And she's noticed that what happens when you go to the newspapers, the way they're normally structured is you have the news columns, and then a little bit later on you get the opinion or the comments, right? So we actually do our kind of publications by facts and values. But here's the problem. People today aren't interested in the facts. So because you can track user habits online, they notice that people basically skim over the facts section of the online media and go straight for the opinion or comment section, the kind of salacious claims. Not only that, social media knows that you are far more likely to engage and share with salacious and interesting and overstated claims about opinion than you are about facts. So did you know the algorithms actually push those higher up your news feeds, higher up, and so they're right at the top of your feeds, which is one of the reasons why fake news gets shared so often, because it's interesting Whether it's factual or not is neither here nor there often. It's just that it's interesting. Roy Greenslade is a lecturer, a professor in journalism just down the road from where I minister in London at City University, and he's written this: "The lack of a distinction between news and comment has imprinted itself on readers. Now they either cannot distinguish the difference or, just as worryingly, don't really care about the difference between facts and values. Time perhaps to coin a neologism for news as comment in the style of the one applied to broadcasting integration of information and entertainment called infotainment." In other words, he's saying the breakdown of this kind of news and comment thing has stopped. And now we just have comment as news. And of course, that paves the way for fake news, because if it's your opinion and facts and values have been split apart, then you share it. It's just someone's opinion. But then suddenly we find ourselves in problems. Is this propaganda or not? We don't know. In fact, it gets worse. Hannah Arendt wrote in her 1951 book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between facts and fiction, or facts and values, and between true and false no longer exist." What's she saying? She's saying, look, if you buy into this facts-values distinction, you lack the means, as Walter Lippmann, a political commentator, once said, you lack the means to detect lies. And if you can't detect lies anymore, you're open to being manipulated. And you have to ask the question, not just how was it that Donald Trump was elected, but how was it that Donald Trump was elected in this generation? That's the real question. A man who, one study has put, basically lied 2,000 times in his first year in office, and that's just his public lies. That's 6 a day on average. How is it that someone like that was elected? Well, it wasn't a surprise. It was because there's arguably a generation that lacks the means to detect facts and values and see the difference between the two. So what do we do with this? Well, I think we need to see some of the problems with the facts-values dichotomy. The world doesn't divide neatly along these lines. A philosopher who's thought a lot about this, a guy called Hilary Putnam, and he's talked about the way that actually a lot of values, like generosity and skillful, are things which there are clearly facts about them. So if I say to you, I'm a very skillful footballer and I'm better than Lionel Messi, okay, you can evaluate that value. Am I skillful or not? If you say you're a very generous person, we can evaluate it. Just because it's a value doesn't mean it ceases to be true, right? It's not just opinion. If you're generous, that will show itself. Generosity and skillfulness show themselves to be true or false. And Hilary Putnam's written this: "There are many sorts of statements amenable to such terms as correct, incorrect, true or false, warranted or unwarranted, that are not descriptions, but that are under rational control governed by facts. Not even David Hume, who came up with the fact-value dichotomy, would be willing to classify, for example, generous, elegant, skillful as concepts to which no facts correspond." Do you hear what he's saying? He's saying you can evaluate values. Now, of course, you might want to hide behind it and say, I'm entitled to my opinion, but the question is not whether you're entitled to it, but is it a valid opinion? Is it a good opinion? Is it a true opinion? Surely, if we're exchanging opinions, we're wanting to engage with that. So facts and values need to be evaluated. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature and who was wrongly imprisoned for 11 years in the gulags of Stalin's Russia, tried to fight the propaganda machine of Russia, not by saying we do away with facts and we buy into the facts-values distinction, but by fighting for truth. Because he saw that actually truth is always linked to liberty. Truth claims are often power plays, but the way you discern the power and what's going on is not by jettisoning truth, but by looking at what people are trying to do with those truth claims. And he wrote this: "One word of truth can outweigh the entire world." In other words, he says you fight for truth in the right way. You campaign for it. You don't jettison it. And maybe the fact that we've bought into this redefinition of truth has opened us up to problems. So let's think then a bit about the nature of truth. And I really think as we try to reintegrate facts and values that the nature of truth is a key place to start. And it might surprise you that actually Jesus Christ had a lot to say about this. If you turn in these that you've got on your tables, these are Luke's Gospels. So Luke wasn't himself one of the eyewitnesses to Jesus' life. He was someone who investigated the eyewitness accounts, as he writes. And he writes this down that we might know certainty about the truth of these claims. And if you turn to page 13, Jesus makes a very interesting comment on the nature of truth. Page 13, which is chapter 4. And Jesus goes to his hometown. And look down at that little number 16, verse 16 of chapter 4 on page 13. Jesus went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. He unrolled it and found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim," notice the phrase, "good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." He rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendants, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Here's the claim at the heart of Christianity, and a crucial philosophical claim, that truth is personal. Truth is not abstract. Truth is personal. So when Jesus Christ here reads from Isaiah 61, one of the great prophecies in the whole of the Old Testament about the nature of God, about who God is and what he will do when he comes into his world, Jesus doesn't say, "Let me now expound to you a doctrine or a dogma. Let me give you a true equation." He doesn't picture it as a number of 42, if you've read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He says, "This is fulfilled in your eyes because I'm here." In other words, the truth about God is me. I am the truth about God. Truth is personal. Now, that's a hugely important move, because here's the thing about personhood. In a person, facts and values are integrated, right? Let me give you a silly example. A few years ago, I was in a discussion with some friends of mine. They're kind of old rugby-playing friends of mine, and they were having their best go at pop philosophy. And so the debate, as it often does, over a couple of pints got kind of funny and a bit heated. And one guy, who's a lovely guy, great rugby player, not the brightest, I know that sounds a bit harsh, he's really not. And so he was trying to kind of push on and was trying to say that he claims that he's a real supporter of freedom of speech. The funny thing is, he's the loudest guy in the room all the time, and he often talks over the top of people. So he was getting a lot of banter and stick back at him on this claim, and he was protesting it more and more loudly until eventually, in his frustration, he shouted this. He said, "I am for freedom of speech. Would you stop interrupting me?" You see the problem? Facts. He's making a fact claim, but the value in his life, it just doesn't stack up. Facts and values are integrated in people. So when we see someone claim something, in a personal life, you can see whether it stacks up, and we're really good at detecting this. If we're not so good at detecting on print or on media whether it's true, when you see someone or talk to them, you pick up on it. Are they authentic? Do they have integrity? So when Jesus says, for example, here's a value, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, well, you just look at his life. On the cross as he dies, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." There is an integrity, there is an authenticity there to the value and the truth about existence in his life. It comes together, it reintegrates. So a person can't be divided into facts and values. They are integral, right? From the word meaning whole. They get an integrity to them. Also, truth being personal reconnects truth to values like wisdom and to liberty. So historically, truth was never an end in and of itself. The ancients used to talk about the way that scientia, that is, knowledge of truth, was subordinate to sapientia, which is wisdom. In other words, the point of getting truth was to live well. Now, I wonder if you noticed in this quote from Jesus in Isaiah 61, he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor." In other words, he says, you'll know the truth about God by the way that truth impacts on the lives of those who come into contact with it. He says there will be good news. It must be news, it must be factual, it must be true, but it must be good, it must make a difference to the poor, to the prisoners, to those who are blind. Fascinating incident, you don't need to look it up, but later on in Luke chapter 7, John the Baptist, who has prophesied about the coming of Messiah Jesus, sends his disciples to Jesus to ask this question: are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another? In other words, are you him? Are you bringing the truth about God? And Jesus doesn't say to the disciples, here are the facts about me. He says something fascinating. He says, go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. In other words, he says, you want to know if I'm true? You want to know if the truth about God is actually in me and I'm bringing it to you? Look at the difference. Do you see people being set free? Do you see poverty being alleviated? Do you see the blind being back their sight? You see a world bursting into bloom. That's how you know that it's true, because it's making a difference to lives. So that's how we see truth in Christianity. Truth is personal, which I think then leads us, as I wrap up, on the challenge of truth. One of our great assumptions is that when we're confronted with the truth, we will respond and say, it's the truth. I was looking for it all along. Can I say that is hopelessly naive about human nature? Because, of course, the reality of us is that we have a contradictory relationship with truth ourselves. We love the truth, and sometimes we find the truth a threat. There was a book written a few years ago called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. And in it, there was research that showed this. We cheat just a little, enough to pass unnoticed, and importantly, to convince ourselves that we aren't really being dishonest. This fudge factor is key. We want to cheat to benefit from it, but we also want to think of ourselves as honest people. So we resolve the conflict by what psychologists call cognitive flexibility. It's a great phrase, isn't it? Self-deception to you and I. We convince ourselves we are moral by the standards we hold, but we are happy to break those standards if it advantages us, as long as we're not caught. So here's the truth. Are you on the side of truth or not? See, we like to say that we are, but one of the things is that sometimes the hardest thing to give is in. When Jesus Christ comes on the scene, he is announced as being full of grace and truth. There is the ultimate fact-value integration. Truth about the world, truth about God, truth about him, truth about you and me, but also gracious. What does that mean? That he's for you. And so therefore, his truth about you, can I say this, is not a threat. You might say, well, that sounds nice, but how do I know? Well, here's the question. Here's the thought experiment. What would it be like if someone knew you, the real you, the you behind the filters, the you behind the projections, the you behind the lies, whatever you want to call them, half-truths, white lies, you can come up with your own names for them. The you behind the cognitive flexibility, the real you. Someone saw you, everything about you, warts and all of the browser history, all of what you've done in your life. And at that moment, knowing everything about you, with all of that power, because they know all that truth about you, they used it to bless you and for your good, not to hurt you. Wouldn't that be ultimately liberating? Wouldn't that mean that the truth was now something which beckoned you rather than concerned you? My friends, that is the truth about Christianity, because the truth about Christianity is the person of truth, Jesus Christ, comes into the world, and on the cross, he, the truth, dies for our lies. We often break our promises, but on the cross, he is the one who is broken for our broken promises so that we can be made whole. He demonstrates to you, finally, once and for all, that God, who is the truth, is for you, not against you. And when you grasp that, then it liberates you to accept the truth about yourself, about God, and about the world. I'm going to close by reciting a poem to you. 19 years ago, I was sitting in a meeting like this, and someone did a talk actually on truth, and at the end they said this poem. It's by a guy called Francis Thompson. He was writing in the 19th century. He had run away from home because of the weight of parental expectations. I wonder if some of you in this room identify with that. And he turned to opium addiction. He was on the streets of Charing Cross around London. Occasionally, in moments of lucidity, he'd write these poems into a local newspaper, and they would say that he was as good, as great as the writer Milton, but they knew not who he was. And one truth he wrote was about the kingdom of God, and it was about how his battle with the truth led to one day him giving in and seeing the truth about God. Let me end on this, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions. O world invisible, we view thee. O world intangible, we touch thee. A world unknowable, we know thee. Inapprehensible, we clutch thee. Does the fish soar to find the ocean, or the eagle plunge to find the air? Do we ask of the stars in motion if they have rumor of you there? Not where the wheeling systems darken and our benumbed conceiving soars, the drift of pinions would we hearken beats at our own clay-shuttered doors. The angels keep their ancient places, turn but a stone, and start a wing. 'Tis ye, 'tis your estranged faces that miss the many-splendid thing. But when so sad, thou canst not sadder cry, and upon thy so sore loss shall shine the traffic of Jacob's ladder pitched betwixt heaven and Charing Cross. Yea, in the night my soul, my daughter, cry heaven clinging by the hems, and lo, Christ walking on the water, not of Gennesaret, but Thames. Let me pause there. You've got a moment now to think about your questions, to text them in. 2 minutes, and then Max is going to come up.
Great. Well, thank you for those who texted in questions, and do feel free to keep them coming as we enter this Q&A. So first of all, Pete, first question is, how can all truth be personal? And what does that mean? It seems quite abstract.
It's quite clever. Do you see that? Truth being personal sounds abstract. Thank you. Good question. So when we say that all truth is personal, there's kind of a philosophical reality to that. I think there's also a practical reality. Let me take them in reverse order. Practical reality. We always say truth as human beings to do something in the world. Okay, so freedom of speech, for example, is obviously a really important value that's underpinning a lot of Western society. But one of the questions that kind of goes with that is, why do people speak? You're trying to do something in the world when you speak, and when you engage with truths, you're always in some endeavor. It's not neutral. It doesn't occur in a context-neutral way, as though it's different to the reasons that you're exploring life or the particular academic study you're engaged with. So this idea that there's kind of, it's often the Star Trek view that we have the kind of rational, truthful element, and then we have the kind of values element, a bit like Dr. Spock. That just doesn't stack up, but every truth claim is trying to do something in the world, even if it's just solve a mathematical proof. But think about it, why are those mathematical proofs often described as elegant? Right? There's a value claim, because there's a beauty, there's an aesthetic to them. They're doing something, they're moving us in some way. So there's a practical element that truth doesn't occur in a vacuum, and therefore is not just this abstract thing bouncing around the universe. It's set in a context of society and people who are engaging with it, and therefore it's personal. There's also a theological reality, which is all truth comes from somewhere. It can't just emerge. And one of the great problems for a secular atheist would be to say, well, is there such a thing as truth? Because truth, by its definition, seems to imply that it's consistent across all times and all places. But then actually, if truth just emerges from subjectivity, it can't be across all times and all places, because it's just a person comes up with it. So for truth to be personal and to be true across all times and all places must mean that it comes from the heart of God, who is the one person who is across all times and all places. So truth emerges from the very heart of God and who he is. He is a truthful being, but he is also a personal being as well. Grab me on that afterwards. There's a lot to engage with there.
Great, thanks, Pete. Next question is, if we can test facts by whether they integrate with values, how does a Christian explain the violence done in the name of Jesus?
Great question, and thank you for that. Look, I guess one of the questions is not just whether something is done in someone's name, but is actually legitimate it was done in their name. Okay, so classic example is if you stole my coat and you were unfortunately follically challenged like me, and so you saw a bold person wearing my coat running down the road, and you see him knock over a granny and laugh and say, ha ha, sucks, and then runs off. Would it be legitimate for you to say, Pete, that was outrageous, how could you do that? Just stealing my coat and having my limited haircut doesn't make you me. Stealing the name of Jesus and claiming something in his name doesn't mean that it was actually done in his name. So you've got to read the scriptures and say, what does Jesus mandate? Does Jesus mandate that type of violence or behavior that has been done? Or was he himself being used and manipulated, something done in his name that was not his? Now, you're intelligent people, you get that distinction, so read scriptures and look at it for yourselves. And I put it to you that in Scripture you see a person who is prepared to lay down his life for his enemies, so how therefore could it be true, if that is who he really is and what he espoused and taught and modeled, that you could do violence in his name? Surely that would be a manipulation and a distortion of the truth about Jesus Christ, which is what I believe it is. But you need to read the Scriptures for yourself and come to your conclusions on that.
Next question about other religions. We believe Jesus is the truth because he unites his values and actions. However, what about other religious leaders in other religions? If they unite the two, does that make them the truth?
Great, thank you. This is where Jesus is very different. So, for example, Muhammad does not claim to be the truth about God. He would rend his clothes and his garments if you'd been able to talk with him and you said, are you the truth about God? He claims to bring truth about God. He claims to be the great prophet about God. He doesn't claim that he himself is the very truth about God. He's not saying the truth is in him. He's just claiming to point to it. And this is where Christianity and Jesus Christ is different to all other world religions. Other world religions claim to reveal something about the nature of God. Jesus claims to be God in human form. That is a very different type of claim. So when he's doing the scroll of Isaiah, he doesn't say, I'm now going to unpack this for you. He says, this has been fulfilled in your hearing in me right now. Okay, that's the controversial claim, which means you're not just engaging with the things that are revealed about Jesus, you are engaging with him. He is the truth, he says, about God. So he's the tallest poppy in the field, and therefore I think he's the one to engage with. Is it true when he claims to reveal the truth about God? But he's in a category that's different to all other world religions. No one else in the major world religions is claiming to be God and to be the truth about God. They just claim to reveal it. That's a very different nature of claim.
And time for one final question.
Sure.
What if the Christian truth is a placebo, i.e. true for you, but not really truth?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the best thing about that would be to engage with that. I mean, if you're bright, you're good at constructing narratives. Okay. Archbishop Cranmer, who founded the Anglican Church in its modern form, said this, or to paraphrase him slightly, said, "What the heart wants, the will chooses, and the intellect justifies." You know, so what you really want, you choose, and then you justify with a narrative after the fact. And that's very true. You know that because often if you're talking to your friends, and let's say they're going out with someone who's a nightmare and you want to warn them off, they will give you 20 coherent reasons about why this person is the love of their life. They just can't hear you because we're good at constructing narratives to justify our disposition, right? So you've got a narrative there, you know, that Christianity is just a placebo. That's not your narrative. Of course, you came up with that probably from communism, and you're just recycling it for the 21st century. But I'm sure you're an original thinker as well. So as you engage with that, does the shoe fit? Does the narrative work? Does it fit facts about the world and the values about the world? Or is that just a convenient story for a way for you to keep the truth at arm's length? Now, so are you really prepared to do the hard work and get into the scriptures and look at it and say, okay, let me engage with this as an adult? Can I just say, Michael, who'll be speaking this evening, will be engaging with, you know, that type of question about, is Christianity inherently arrogant, and therefore are its truth claims able to be trusted, and do they bring about a humbling effect and a gracious effect in the lives of believers, or are they just things we make up to believe to make ourselves feel more comfortable? So again, you've got to engage with it. Don't just chuck a narrative at it from 100 miles away. Engage with the truth of it and the truth claim.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Pete. Should we just give Peter a final round of applause? Brilliant. And thanks so much, everybody, for coming along this lunchtime. It's proved to be a really fascinating start to the week. Do carry on those conversations that have started. The area will be opened up into a cafe-esque area. Tea and coffee and desserts will be coming out. So don't feel like you have to rush off after this. Alongside that, there will be an optional discussion table around this area with Michael Dormdy from the Divinity faculty, which will be exploring whether the scriptures are historically reliable. So if that would be of interest, then do stick around for that. Do, yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks, Michael. Pete will also be sticking around if you want to ask him any more questions. There will also be, on your way out, if you can't stick around but would like to pursue the matter further, then there will be some books which are there for you to take for free. There are also the Luke Gospels on your chairs there for free for you if you'd like to read more into that. Can I make you just aware of the white little slips that are on your chairs? We'd love to hear any feedback you have, any comments about how we can make these events better, how we can improve them, or what you've got out of them. I'll just make you aware particularly about the box that says tell me more. Again, if you've got a dash off but you'd like to hear more about how you can delve into this topic, do fill in your details. That's just so somebody can get in touch with you, send you an email about this kind of stuff that Pete and Michael have been discussing. Your details won't be held past this week. And absolutely finally, these events will be running throughout the week, every lunchtime and evening. This evening, our guest speaker, Michael Ramsden, is going to be speaking on the topic, is the Christian faith, is it inherently arrogant? And he'll be joined by his special guest, Sharon Dirks, who is a neuroscientist and former Oxford academic. So do come back for that. But until then, that's all for now. I hope to see you then. Have a great afternoon.